I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining me for this week's all-new episode of From the Corner Office. More recently, there have been two topics that I've spent a great deal of time discussing with entrepreneurs, corporate executives, and our staff here at Black Enterprise. First, I have stressed that we must all have a laser beam focus on the underrepresentation of African Americans in the C-suite and boardrooms across industry. Secondly, African Americans must play pivotal roles in the ongoing digital tech revolution as producers and marketers, and not just consumers, or we risk having our firms and careers derailed. This past year has been marked by the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and systemic racism that have frankly been heightened by the disruption of technology. Against this backdrop, I have the perfect guest for today's episode. I'm talking about none other than Bozoma St. John, Global Chief Marketing Officer of Netflix, the world's leading streaming entertainment service with annual revenues of some $20 billion and 183 million memberships in more than 190 countries. Let me share a bit of this dynamo's background. She spent more than 2 decades in the C-suite of some of the world's leading brands and tech companies. Born in Middletown, Connecticut, she spent her early years in Nairobi, Kenya, Washington, D.C., and Accra, Ghana, before her family immigrated to Colorado Springs when she was just 12 years old. She went on to receive a degree in English and African American Studies from Wesleyan University, where she currently sits on the President's Advisory Council. Always a trendsetter, Boz, as she is effectively known, developed an impressive track record as a trailblazing brand and marketing executive. Heralded for her bold thinking and cutting-edge ideas, she has produced remarkable results for Pepsi, Apple, Uber, and Endeavor. Among her accomplishments, as cultural branding marketer for PepsiCo, Boz activated celebrity endorsements with Beyonce, Kanye West, Nicki Minaj, Eminem, Katy Perry, and her idol, Michael Jackson. In her role as head of consumer marketing for Apple Music and iTunes, she launched Apple Music as well as led campaigns geared towards growing consumer brand recognition across the globe. Recognized for such breakthrough work, Boz has been inducted into the Billboard Hall of Fame, as well as the Hall of Achievement for the American Advertising Federation. The recipient of numerous honors, she was appropriately featured on the cover of our February 2017 issue as one of the most powerful women in business. Today, she is here to discuss her amazing career journey, as well as what it takes for African Americans to ascend to the C-suite in the tech sector. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bozoma St. John. Welcome,
Thank
Bozoma.
you so much. I appreciate it, Butch. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be virtually in your corner office.
Absolutely. Boz, your story is unique, but I don't want to give anyone the opportunity to try to fill in for themselves. But I would love for you to be able to share with everyone, because many people know that don't know perhaps that you were born in the U.S., moved to Ghana at 6 months, and then came back, if you will, at age 12 to Colorado of all places. But would love for, and have talked many times, both you've been on the cover of Black Enterprise and talked at a Women of Power Summit and other things, but talked about how your father was your inspiration. But if you could give us a few minutes on your background, and how you got to even going into marketing in the first place and pursuing your dreams here in the US.
Oh, wow. Well, first, I do want to thank you so much for having me. I consider Black Enterprise to be home. I'm actually, if anybody asked you, I'd be shocked that I find Black Enterprise to be home, because I so aspired to be in the pages of Black Enterprise. And when I was put on the cover a few years ago, it blew my mind. I mean, I also blew up the cover, by the way, and have it printed. So just so you know. But yeah, my beginnings probably would not predict that I would be here in this seat right now. I think like many of us, we have dreams and aspirations, but the likelihood that we make it into these roles is so slim that it feels like an impossible dream. It doesn't keep us from dreaming it, but the reality of it feels unreachable. And so I am quite still in awe of the journey that has brought me here. As you mentioned, my parents are both from Ghana. They are immigrants to the United States of America. And as such, we're very much determined to have me and my 3 younger sisters live the American dream. Moving to Colorado Springs, Colorado is pretty much like any other immigrant story. They had some friends who lived in a tiny town who said it's safe here. You can raise your family here. The jobs are good and you'll be happy. And so they moved without much knowledge of what Colorado Springs, Colorado was going to offer. What I found, Butch, was that it was nothing like where I'd come from. In fact, nothing like anywhere I'd ever been before. And my family had moved around a lot when I was a kid. But ending up in Colorado Springs, Colorado at 12 was at the moment where, all of us have been 12. All of us know what that feels like. You're probably lanky. You haven't grown into your ears yet. You're a little unsure of yourself. I was all of those things. And what really determined for me what then would become the pathway to this career, which of course I did not know at the time, was that I had to connect with my classmates, with my neighbors, with the people at church by any means necessary. Meaning that I had to find ways to connect with them that had nothing to do with my skin color or the language I spoke at home, the foods we ate, my accent, or any other cultural nuances they found weird. The thing that I needed to find was the connection points, the things that would make us similar. And so that meant everything in pop culture. So what was the hottest movie? What was the hottest song? Who's the hottest sports athlete? What were the films that people were watching? Like all of those types of details were what I needed to understand in order to connect to people. Now, of course, that did not protect me from any of the questions that came, about who I am or what I do or what I eat at home. All of those questions came. And as you can imagine, at 12 and 13, I got teased pretty much constantly for all of those things, my dark skin, the foods I ate, the accent with which I talked with. The most incredible thing to me, though, at that time, and this is, I think, unique in that my mother was highly influential in making sure that I did not assimilate. Now, I know that's different for a lot of immigrants who come to the US wanting to blend in, right? Because there's danger in not doing that. My mother refused. We had weird names, right, that people couldn't pronounce. And she refused to allow us any kind of, sideways nickname that didn't sound anything like our names. She wouldn't let it. When I asked for my friends to come over for, a play date or a slumber party, she would cook the food that we ate at home all the time. She didn't order the pizza because she was like, they will eat our food when they're in our house. And she spoke to them in our native tongue. Now, my mother speaks 5 languages. She didn't care. She did not care one bit. She was like, if you're in my house, you're going to speak my language. And I'm like, Ma, these little white kids, they don't even know they don't know what you're talking about. And she'd be like, well, you go to their house and they speak to you in their native language. When they come here, they will do the same. And for me, that, of course, like in retrospect and in hindsight, meant that I had the upbringing which told me that what I have to offer is special. It is unique. It is valid. It is not something to be hidden or assimilated. And so it is why I'm able to walk into rooms as I do today and know that I don't need to adjust to anybody else's standard, that what I have to offer is equally as important, that just because you've been here longer doesn't mean that I don't have a point of view and that it shouldn't be heard. And for me, it was freeing. It meant that I had the opportunity to be able to really express myself in a way that I don't think most people have the opportunity to, especially at that age. But it was really that, need to connect to my classmates and understand what was happening in pop culture that drove me to have to find the connections. And it is absolutely what I do today.
Yeah. I mean, your parents obviously put a tremendous amount of pride in recognizing who you are. So your parents reinforced, and I identify with this wholly because my parents were, 100%. Listen, you have every bit as much as anybody else does, and you're beautiful as you are, right?
Mm.
And so that having your parents continue to reinforce that helps you to transition. You went from obviously Colorado Springs, and you went to the Northeast now to go to school, and then ultimately going into a career in the Northeast. But that must have been quite an adjustment as well, going from Ghana to Colorado Springs and then ultimately to Wesleyan in Connecticut
Yeah.
for college. How was your college experience, and then what led you to leave when you left college to want to go into marketing? What was the marketing and sales? What was the key thing that moved you in that direction?
Yeah. Well, the my experience at Wesleyan was actually quite pivotal also for a number of reasons. When I was in high school, I was really good at science and math. And again, as a child of African immigrants, it's like you only have a few options of a career to choose from, right? And I'm sure you've heard it before. It's like you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Those are the three things. And maybe you could be a teacher. You know what I mean? Like those were the options. And so I decided I was going to be a doctor because I was good at science and it was fine. And so I went to school. I went to college as a pre-med major, and or a pre-med concentration in chem. And I loved it. It was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. But I found that the arts was what actually made me tick. That the classes that I took that were about literature, going to the plays on campus. By the way, Lin-Manuel Miranda and I went to Wesleyan together. He was a couple of years younger than I am. But it's like it was a very rich artistic school, which did not shun the sciences or the math at all. I mean, people were allowed to have both. But it was where I found my blossoming for understanding that the arts were as important as the sciences, and that could be an option. And so I double majored, English and African American studies becoming additional majors. And that African American studies major is another pivotal point for me. When I got to Wesleyan, I had not yet experienced had not yet identified my African Americanness. In Colorado Springs, I was clearly African. It was like, oh, there goes the African girl. You know what I mean? In college, I had a different identity. And I found that to be so remarkable because my world opened up. The dorm that I stayed in my freshman year of college was the Malcolm X house, El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz house. And that was the dorm for all the Black students. It's where every meeting was held for the Black Student Union, how we anticipated and discussed any issues, concerns that were happening politically or artistically on campus. And I really found my connection there, and it opened up the whole world for me on a diversity of artists that I didn't know existed. Or didn't know existed in any kind of real way. And so when I was graduating from Wesleyan, I decided to take a year before I went to med school and moved to New York, sort of on a whim, because I was young and stupid and didn't realize what a danger that was with no plan. But this is where it's like fate and destiny and everything, sort of matches up, right? Because I was so ingrained in the literature of the African American experience, I was really attracted to also filmmakers and other creators in the space, including Spike Lee. And so when I got the call from my temp agency that Spike had fired his assistant and needed somebody to answer the phones at his advertising agency, I jumped. I don't even think jump is the right word. Like I sprinted, I ran to the office, ran right in and just threw myself down and said, oh, whatever you need me to do, Mr. Lee, I'm here to do it. And he took one look at me and was just like, can you just answer the phones? And from there, I was really intrigued by, him as a writer also. One of his favorite stories to tell about me these days, because we are still very good friends, is that on literally my first day, I saw him carrying what I didn't know was the screenplay for Bamboozled. And I asked him if I could read it, of course, in my naivete, right? So he gives me the screenplay in a little bit of like, I would call it like, the arrogance that Spike carries, like, here she goes, she's not going to be able to read this whole thing. And I got it back to him in 3 days. But here's the thing, Butch, I didn't just get back to him in 3 days. I made markings on it. I corrected grammar. I asked questions about character development and all of that, which of course offended him to no end. It's like, if anybody knows Spike, that you don't give him feedback like that. And especially not a 22-year-old who is like wet behind the ears and hasn't experienced anything in life. He definitely wasn't looking for any comments that I had. But I think what attracted him was the fact that I had some spunk, and obviously some good ideas that were yet to be found. But he definitely saw the vision, and it was what opened up the whole world of advertising and marketing to me, and storytelling. To be under the tutelage of someone like him at such a time when I was, young and impressionable and just trying to discover what my calling was, it was really important to be with someone who clearly understands his own voice. This is not just the voice of a community, but his own voice. And then how to express it in a way that brings light and shines light on an experience that sometimes is shunned. It was an unbelievable experience. And I certainly have been very much influenced by that experience, and that the storytelling I do now, from the seats in which I occupy in marketing, mean that I don't deny, our collective experience, that I don't think it is not worthy of being mainstream, or that I should dumb it down for anybody's consumption, because Spike certainly didn't, and he still hasn't.
Right. The intersection of sales and marketing, because that's important. Talk a little bit about how does one get into a position, because what you've always gone after and assumed line positions. And to be clear, and that's not to knock non-line positions or not, but you said, hey, you quickly recognize these are the positions where people are chosen from to move forward. These are the positions that make a difference along the way. It would be helpful to share a little bit about how does a young person navigate that's either coming out of college or is in mid-career and say, hey, I got to get myself in a position to be seen, to be in the room, to be seen, or to be heard. Talk a little bit about how does strategies, if you would, some words of advice or strategies on how to put yourself in a position to be seen and to be recognized. If you follow what I mean.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, there's so many ways to answer that question. It is such a complicated one because there are a few ways to approach it, right? By the way, I've tried a few of them myself and some of them have worked and some have not. So I won't pretend as if this is the end all be all, but of course I will share what I have learned. Very early on, so after my experience with Spike, I decided to leave his agency and go to what I would call traditional advertising agency, because I was under the assumption, probably advised, that diversifying my experiences, and diversifying means the other way around, not just being, Black or of color, but diversifying mean that, oh, you've got to get out of the Black space. You have to, get into general population, whatever that means, in order to showcase the fact that you have the ability to storytell from more than one perspective. I took that advice, Butch, and I went to, and I've said this publicly, so it's no shade to anybody, but I went to Arnold Worldwide, and I worked on a brand called GlaxoSmithKline, right, for the smoking cessation products. I'd been promoted to, I think, account executive or something like that. I was, again, like early in my career. I lasted for 3 months. Now, whether or not I quit or I was fired, that's for the history books. That's not something we'll discuss here. But all I know is I was there for 3 months. Part of the reason why I failed at that job, and I'll take the failure, was that I did it out of an academic pursuit, thinking that what I had to contribute could only be validated by being in a role or in a position that did not speak to my heart. That was only academic, that only spoke to my intellect, but not to my passion. That was a mistake. I knew at the moment I walked in there, but when you're young and trying to make it, and somebody advises you that the only way you're going to make it forward is if you go in this direction because you don't want people to think that you are only one-dimensional, was the mistake. Because the truth of the matter is that we can show our dimensions in more than one way, and that experience is not the only one. I would much rather that young people or people who are starting out in their careers go after their passion, because that's where you then put in all the effort. That's where all of your creative ideas come to bear. The solutions that you want to make, the late nights that you have to stay up for, the things that will drive you to find the innovation in the job can only be done if you're truly passionate about it. This is not a phone it in type of situation. This is not just a time card type of experience. It's not like you're watching the clock thinking, well, when do I leave? No, this is the type of stuff that like you can't stop thinking about. The kind of projects and the kind of job and the kind of relationships that you want to build over time. And so finding that early and finding that immediately. And by the way, it doesn't mean that you have to be right early on. It just means that when you're wrong, like they say, fail fast. You're in it, you try it, it's not working, leave. Go to the next thing. And I think in this day and age, which is probably different from when I started, is that, there was this, well, it kind of still follows me now, but there was this thought that if you jumped around too much, it would be bad for your career, right? That if you, especially early on, if you look like you only spend, a year here, 18 months there, 24 months there, that you would look unstable and therefore no one would hire you. I think I'm living proof that that is not true. So I would recommend that instead of trying to find tenure and longevity, that you actually find passion. It is the experience that is going to make the purest difference. The other thing that I have found is that because you're following your passion and because you're trying to get into roles, or let's just even say companies or industries that you're most interested in, you'll find that volunteering for the extracurricular or the extra credit projects comes much easier because you actually want to do it. I found myself countless times in the role of being, like my CMO's person to go to when there was a special project. It's like, oh, we don't really have the time or the people to work on this thing. Hey, Boz, do you think you want to take a crack at it? Yes, every time, yes. Because what happened is that I became the person who they knew could get it done, in addition to my regular duties. And I did it happily because most of the time those projects were things that, really were near and dear to my heart. Right. In fact, one quick story about that, Butch, was that when I was at PepsiCo very early on, I was working on Mountain Dew, the brand, and the CMO at the time, C. Nicholson, who was tremendous. I was certainly that person to her, that she would call and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And I give her my opinion and she'd thank me and then that'd be it, right? Or sometimes she'd assign me something that was a side project. Well, in this particular case, there was a nasty rumor going around about Mountain Dew and we were losing sales very quickly. A competitor had launched what we'd call an urban legend or urban myth about yellow dye number 5. We won't talk about what that myth was, but it meant that sales were tanking. And the project she wanted me to figure out was whether or not we could find a new target, a new demo for the brand. I think you remember that early on, Mountain Dew was the brand that we affectionately called the one for the crazy white boys, the ones who jumped off roofs and did dangerous things. And it was like, why are we even doing that? I don't understand. And my job became trying to figure out if there were other demographics that could identify with the brand. Well, one of my passions, of course, living in New York and living in Harlem, was to go up to Rucker Park, during the summer and watch street ball. And at the time, And One was the team to watch. When they'd come into town, they'd have their tour. You'd absolutely go and watch them. And so the info that I gave to C and the projects I worked on for one whole summer, I'm talking about like every night I would go to the parks, whether they were uptown in the Bronx or in Brooklyn or in Harlem, to watch basketball games and look at the crowd and understand what they were doing and why they were doing it, and finding out that there were no brands who were up there really, with any support, meant that I was able to give a leg up, to Mountain Dew, to be able to be one of the first to go in and give real brand sponsorship to a league that had not yet been recognized by any major brands. And that was one of the projects that launched, at least for me, legitimacy in how we look at how, even as African Americans, our culture could impact business in a way that is real. This is not a myth. This is not for just D&I purposes, but that it is a real thing. And that was driven by my passion. So if there's any advice, it's that, find your passion and find it quickly and fail fast.
No question. So you've had, a tremendous career and rise through a variety of positions. And I'm not going to take everyone through all of that, but from PepsiCo to Apple to where you were the marketing executive at PepsiCo and huge position at Apple and Apple Music, came in with Beats, and then you were like, oh my God, that must be the dream job of all. And then they looked up and they go, no, I'm going to be the chief brand officer at Uber. And they were like, why would she ever, people are, why would she want to ever leave Apple? I mean, you've got to be crazy. You never leave Apple. And you're a brand officer at Uber, and people are like, oh, she's leaving to become a chief marketing officer at Endeavor. And they were like, Endeavor? But Uber, everyone knows what Uber is. And then lo and behold, this opportunity comes for you in terms of being the chief marketing officer at Netflix, which is, and people forget that 10 years ago, people didn't even know what Netflix was, right? So love to get a little bit of background on, hey, what led to, because this is, the $64,000 question. One, what I think people miss in this is you were offered these opportunities, right? So it's not like you weren't offered the opportunities. That people should, we should be proud of the fact that you were even offered the opportunities, because oftentimes these same type of opportunities have been reserved for white males. Mm. How do you navigate that? I mean, how do you, because you're not only often the only time, probably the only person of color in the room, in the C-suite. How do you maintain your authenticity of who you are, while at the same time providing the discipline, the absolute information and necessary to move these companies forward to be wildly successful? Because every one of these companies you've been at has been very successful, right?
Yeah.
So
this is one that is not a straight line. Some of it I certainly feel came from my early days, as I talked about, feeling that the feeling that my mother gave me, about not assimilating, not feeling like I ever had to, and knowing that my position, my experiences, my language, my music, my culture, my dance, all of the thing, my fashion, are all necessary, that they are not to be dumbed down. And I think that actually lies in the way that I move, in the workplace, that the way that I am sitting here with you now is the way I sit in every boardroom. The way that I speak right now, the stories that I tell, the ways that I gesture, are the ways in which I behave in a boardroom. I don't temper down my Blackness or my womanness or any of the other nesses, that they all come with me. And I believe it makes me a better executive. Makes me more in tune to not just what is happening in my world, but in the world around me, because I understand what it's like not to be talked to. I understand what it's like to be ignored. And what we find is that in most companies, even the big ones, that when you start talking to mass consumers in ways that are all flat, as if you talk to people all equally, that's when brands start to fail. You need nuance. You need a little bit of complexity. You need to talk to people in the manner in which they're used to speaking in order to really connect with them. And I find that my own experiences and my own journey have actually prepared me very much for that. And so that's why when, as at Apple and we're beginning to create Apple Music, the thought about creating, campaigns that would just touch everybody at the same time didn't make any sense. It's like, if we're going to talk about hip hop, and let's talk about hip hop. If we're going to talk about Afro beats, let's talk about Afro beats. If we're going to talk classical. It's not as if you need to like blend it all together in order for people to all align. Music and food, soda is not sold that way. It needs to be sold in a way that can connect to all of us. And so, as I progressed in my career, one thing that has always been consistent for me is knowing that I had to put myself in the work. That I had to reflect myself in the work. And while that might sound counterintuitive, because again, most of us who go into business know that we have to talk to mass consumers, but I believe the best way to connect to people is by showing yourself. I'll use this analogy. It's like, if you've ever been to a cocktail party where you talk to a person and, we've all met this person before, the one who you say, oh, I grew up in Philly. And they're like, really? So did I. You're like, oh, really? Huh, okay. My favorite fruit is strawberries. And they're like, yes, I love strawberries too. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, my favorite color is pink. And they're like, same. Like, those people are not the people you want to hang out with. Those people are the ones that you look at and you're like, okay, you back away slowly, hoping they don't make any fast moves. The
Right.
people you want to talk to are the ones who have a story, the ones who have a little bit of nuance, the ones who have something interesting to say. It is the same in every boardroom. It is the same in every conversation. It's the same in every piece of work. That when we connect to people, they want to understand the stories and the complexities of a certain person. They'll connect if they feel like there's something that they can connect to. They feel like there's something interesting. And it's the same way that I connect in interpersonal conversations and the same way that I connect in my work. I think it's very necessary actually to show up in the work. And so, yeah, having been in positions in which I've been sought out for the role, I feel is a testament to the fact that I don't shrink. I don't try to go into the wallpaper and blend in. I mean, speaking of wallpaper, it's like I got Black women on my wall. I don't play around. I'm here representing all of the time. And so to me, it's a really important note to make that for us and for this very moment in time, as you alluded to, as we're dealing with all kinds of challenges and issues in society and culture, it is that much more important that we show up in the work. It's that much more important that we show our full, true selves in these environments, because it's actually how we're going to stand out. I've always balked at the idea that in order to succeed, I had to blend in, as if the caricature that was made for success is somehow drawn with me in mind. It was never drawn with me in mind. No one ever said that. No one ever said that, like, the CMO of, public companies should look like me. No one ever said that. I was advised the other way, right? It's like, oh, you probably want to tame down your hair. You might not want to have long nails. Don't wear that red lipstick, and definitely don't bring any Blackness into it. You just want to go along. Well, that's never been a way to succeed, because who wants that? That sounds so boring. And I recognize that it's a danger. It's not as if I've been without my criticism. There have been many critics along the way. People who have always said I'm too much of this or too much of that. My opinions are too strong. My opinions are too loud, along with my fashion choices. But the truth of the matter is that I think there's only one way to actually contribute. And that's the way to put yourself in the work and to be loud about it, because it's the only way to make sure that you're actually noticed for what you do.
No question. You have been successful remaining authentic to yourself. And I like the term, as you throw yourself, be a part of the work and being authentic in every way. In this past year, 2020, we have been challenged, right? All of this country, the world, for that matter, has been challenged by, as I said, the twin pandemics, the pandemic of COVID-19 and how that has impacted upon how people interact. But the other pandemic, which has been equally debilitating, has been the pandemic of racism, which has always existed, but was, if you will, put on Front Street in a way that had not been put perhaps before, both in, from George Floyd to, other young men or women who, Breonna Taylor and others who have been violently killed or beaten in a way that was, it was like it was on TV, like we were witnessing it in a way and digesting the way we had not before. So would love to hear, get your feedback on how did you navigate that and maintain not getting, because we all probably got very angry, right, at some point, right? But you have to maintain enough control and dignity and respect to be able to continue to do the work, yet make your point very clear on what's going to be acceptable and what's not going to be acceptable.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think this is another point that you're making, which is that, we've obviously had the stereotypes about us that we always have to be careful about, right? In the corporate environment, which is being angry. Certainly, the angry Black woman stereotype has been levied my way on more than one occasion in more than one review, and most of the time I'm like, well, sometimes that's just passion coming out. Like that's not me threatening anybody. That's me just being passionate. And that's a very different expression than what we legitimately had the real reason to be angry about. When we talk about anger, that's a different emotion, and I feel that there has been a very pointed mask at confusing like our passion and our interest for real anger. That the idea of being the angry person in the office has always been looked down upon, and it could never come out. You had to like just calm down the edges around how you felt about anything, right? I certainly felt that way, that I could never get upset in a meeting when something was offensive, right? Because you'd be then called out as the angry Black woman in the room. I found that I eventually began to let that go, and this happened long before 2020, because I could no longer just hold it. It wasn't, I didn't have the opportunity to, because I felt that it was not only affecting my work, but my person. At the end of the day, we are human beings also. We're not just caricatures or not just figureheads in these spaces, but we're real human beings. And so even as I, walked the halls of Uber and had to have discussions about the treatment of people of color, or even as I was asked about, whether or not I felt some pressure at being, the only Black executive in that company, or whether or not I was tokenized for it, those things made me angry. And I expressed it because I feel like that emotion is valid. So even as, incidents kept happening in 2020, and I found myself frustrated in these discussions that, to your point, were filled with some sort of strange platitudes that I was like, what is happening here? It's like, you just want to make me feel better by saying that, you're sorry, that, you're doing your best. Like, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. I was actually supposed to be, I ended up being on a panel the morning after George Floyd's murder. And I had, written something that, had to be submitted about a week before the panel, right? About my point of view on the advertising industry. And that morning I called the folks who were running the panel and said, remember those slides I sent you last week? Well, you can go ahead and toss those out because I'm not going to talk to any of those points. And I will tell you that there was almost a fisticuffs over the phone about whether or not I was going to be allowed to do that. because I had something else to say, something else that was on my chest. And the point of it was that in that, presentation, I was supposed to outline 3 things, right? 3 points that the audience could take away about how to be better marketers, better prepared, to address their consumers and their audiences during COVID-19. And I changed my 3 words. They just said, be enraged, be enraged, be enraged. That's all I said. And in fact, that ended up being my mantra then for probably the rest of the summer. Every time that I had to walk into a conference room, virtual conference room, that is, to talk about the challenges and the issues and the solutions, or called by different colleagues, different C-suite colleagues around, the industry, asking what more they could do. I said, you should be enraged. I don't understand why you're not as pissed off as I am. And the moment that you become angry, the moment that you allow that expression to be, the better off we will be. And so I think part of it for me, to be quite honest, was letting go of the facade, letting go of the thought that I had to contain my anger, contain anything that I felt. Now, you could say that, well, I'm in a C-suite position. I'm allowed to do that because, I have an important role. But actually, when you think about it, the higher you go, the more the spotlight is upon you. The more that people want you to be a certain way. And so I felt the pressure, not just from my colleagues, but I think from society, on how to behave. And so I did have to turn my anger into some productivity, for sure, because it is the way I am. But I didn't shy away from it, and I still don't. I still hold my colleagues very much responsible for what we are doing. And I feel that fortunately or unfortunately, when you are one or few in a room, we do have the responsibility to say, and we do have the responsibility to talk about it and to hold people accountable. There was a time in my career, in my life, when I was very angry about that, resentful about being the one and only, and having to always have the conversation, having to always point out something that in the work that was racist or insensitive, and having to be like, okay, and knowing that my colleagues would say, oh, well, here she goes again. There's going to be something about Blackness, and I knew that was coming, but I had to let go of the anger of being angry, that like I have a responsibility, and it is okay to show that emotion. And you know what? The truth of the matter is that I've succeeded anyway. And so to me, it is now just a matter of how I am, whatever emotions I'm feeling, very much like I said before, I am in the work. I show up in the work.
What is also unique and interesting is you're being in a C-suite or being a chief marketing officer puts you in sort of an isolated position anyway, regardless of what your background would be, whether you're Black, white, or whatever. But you're a Black female, a Black woman in the C-suite, but you're also in the tech industry, right? And which is even further isolation. And, so people who are in the tech industry are looking for any example of anyone that they can identify with in some way, shape, or form. And so you're not only having to explain it just to corporate America, you explain it to a sector of corporate America that does not enjoy, I should say, the best reputation for being open to inclusiveness. But the fact that they have tapped you to be the chief marketing officer says a lot. I don't know if it says a lot about them, or more so it says more about you, I think. It does say about them, frankly. It's great testimony. This has been great information you have shared with the audience today. I appreciate really, one, we're all very proud of you. We all feel good about being able to put on Netflix because we know we're going to see something there that represents us. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, I received a call from a friend, your sister, if you will. She's Roz, your boss. But Roz Brewer is the new CEO of Walgreens, and she'll be the only Black woman CEO of an S&P 500 company. And this is 2021. And I think that I'll speak up on behalf of what I think and what Black Enterprise thinks. You have done all these positions and you've been wildly successful. Your success has been testimony to hard work, testimony to you remaining authentic, testimony to being creative, and you and I talked about this briefly, and you had it was this Ad Age piece that was written at the end of December, and terrible piece, but it was a piece that said most likely to leave a job in 2021, or to move job, not to leave, but to move job in 2021, and they named you as the person, and they got a lot of criticism from folks, which they should have, because white men move freely around into different positions, and no one ever says, well, they're being too ambitious, they're moving too quickly, they're seeking too many other different things. So people came to your defense, but at the same time, I think it actually, in some ways, you could look at it. My father used to say, you can look at the glass half full or half empty. He always looked at the glass as 3/4 full, right? It was always filled. Glass is always filled. And I would look at it the same way with you. You have had a great career. I know that you have other ambitions and other things. And so be not be dissuaded of your ambition, of your goals, of what you want to do, and know that you will always have the support of us at Black Enterprise and African-American brothers and sisters across this world.
Oh.
So thank you, Bozoma, for your time.
Thank you, Butch. No, that's an incredible word to end on, because I am certainly blessed and have been so well supported by Black Enterprise. As I said at the start, it feels like home. It is where I come to even see the celebration of those of us in this community. And as you said, I am so incredibly proud of Roz. I'm so excited. I remember when she got to Starbucks and, had to deal with challenges like right out the gate, and how magnificently she handled it. And so I think we've all known that eventually, somewhere, hopefully, that she would be tapped. But as you said, it is a very difficult threshold to cross. And that the fact that we only have one right now is testament to that. I hope that there will be more, whether me or somebody else or other people. I hope there are more, and that we all need to continue to be ambitious, to make sure that we continue to crack these areas that have not been so welcoming to us before. And so I'm also very determined to support Roz, that knowing how lonely that role could be, knowing how much criticism she will probably face, what the spotlight will feel like. As you already know, it is our responsibility and it is imperative that we surround her with the kind of positivity, the kind of celebration, and the kind of support that she certainly will need as she enters this new stage. And so I am certainly one of those. I will be cheering loudly, and I'll be here too when I'm like, girl, what you need? Right there with her. So I certainly appreciate your support. And I know that you support her and support all of us who are aspiring to continue to break these ceilings. So thank you so much, Butch.
Absolutely. Listen, God bless you. Continue to walk in harm's way and make a name, take names. And move forward.
I certainly will. Thank you so much.
Okay. God bless. Talk to you soon.